All right, this video is going to be on Rene Descartes and his meditations on first philosophy. All right, so first a little bit about the name. Not the name Rene Descartes, that's just a French name. The name Meditations on First Philosophy, the name of the book, the title of the book. Meditations is pretty straightforward. He's not here talking about the kind of thing people do when they want to relax, right? We come to use the word meditation not quite exclusively for that purpose, but mostly for that purpose to describe the sort of relaxation technique, the centering, the mindfulness stuff. This is just any kind of thinking on, right? So this is time that he's taking to think on first philosophy. It's written as though it's a diary. It's written as though it's a kind of intellectual diary. He's pretending that he's set aside several days, 6 days. It's not a coincidence that he chose 6 days because it was 6 days that took God to create the world. That's intentional symbolism on his part. He's acting as though, or pretending as though for the purpose of this book, that he set aside 6 days in order to just think through the fundamentals of first philosophy. What's first philosophy? First philosophy is metaphysics. Well, what is metaphysics? The word metaphysics has this interesting history. The word metaphysics comes from the name given to a book of Aristotle's called the Metaphysics, obviously. But the story goes that Aristotle himself didn't name it that. The story goes that the book was found and published by Aristotle's students after Aristotle died. And they called it the Metaphysics because it's the stuff that came after the physics. The Physics was his book on the natural world. Right? So there, Aristotle gave an account of causation. He gave an account of change in general, motion, things like that. The same kinds of discussions, more abstract and more philosophical than what you'd find in a physics class today, but in the neighborhood of the kinds of things you'd find in a physics class today. The metaphysics came after. And the word meta in Greek, which can mean lots of things, but it can mean after. So the after physics, the stuff that he wrote after the physics. But even though it came after the physics, it was in a sense meant to be read before the physics, or at least the topic it discussed is one you have to understand before you can understand the physics. Metaphysics has since then been the name for the philosophical discipline that investigates topics, investigates issues that are about the most fundamental nature of reality. So fundamental that we don't even get to them in physics class. So the idea is physics as a discipline studies questions, things, issues that are less fundamental than what's covered in metaphysics. So whereas in physics you might ask a question like, what causes black holes, right, to form? And you might even go more fundamental and say, what is the nature of gravity? The metaphysics would study questions like, what does it mean for something to exist? What is existence? Right? It will ask things like, what is change in general? What is time? Right? Now, physics can sometimes get to areas that are almost that abstract. So Einstein famously engaged in some very abstract speculation with regards to time. But metaphysics is supposed to be even more abstract. And traditionally, it was dealing with those questions that are so fundamental that they can't be resolved by appeal to observation. Because we can only observe the physical world, and metaphysics is about stuff that's in a sense more fundamental than the things that make up the physical world. So when Plato was talking about the forms, there he was talking about metaphysics. When Aristotle was saying the forms aren't what's most fundamentally real, individual concrete things are, he was doing metaphysics. When you're discussing the nature of time, the nature of change, the nature of existence, that's metaphysics. When you're asking whether God exists, that's metaphysics. When you're asking whether there's any non-physical things at all, that's metaphysics. When you're asking whether those non-physical things can causally interact with physical things, that's metaphysics. That's all metaphysics. And first philosophy is the name that was given to metaphysics by, well, Aristotle himself actually refers to it that way sometimes. So the Meditations on First Philosophy is Meditations on Metaphysics, which is a weird title because a lot of it doesn't concern metaphysics at all. A lot of it concerns epistemology. There is metaphysics in here, especially in some of the later chapters, especially chapters 4, 5, and 6, or Meditations 4, 5, and 6. But Meditations 1 and 2 are devoted almost entirely to, not exclusively, but almost, to epistemological questions, to questions about what we can know and how we can know things. So that's what it'll be about. In this video, I'm going to go through part of, at least, Meditation 1. All right, so like I said in the video previewing this and describing what was going on in the early stages of the scientific revolution, Descartes' problem here is that everything he was taught, seemingly, about natural science was wrong. Now, this didn't come to Descartes as some kind of revelation. It's not like he was all in on Aristotelian natural science before the people started making all sorts of grand discoveries. He apparently had a problem with the Aristotelian stuff he was being taught while he was a student at the University of Paris, I believe. But unlike someone like Galileo, who just sort of attacked Aristotle's natural science, but respected Aristotle's views on the nature of knowledge, Descartes is going to say that the problem, or part of the problem, is that Aristotle's philosophical, as opposed to his scientific works, are themselves deeply mistaken. So we recognize today a distinction between science and philosophy. They wouldn't have recognized that distinction in Descartes' time very much. So when I say Aristotle's science versus philosophy, I'm using a contemporary term. You can think of it this way. Descartes believes, whereas people like Galileo didn't, or didn't seem to, that Aristotle's metaphysics and epistemology were in part to blame for his mistakes in natural science, his mistaken views about natural science, and that you needed to get clear on the metaphysics and epistemology before you could do the science well. So Descartes thinks you do need to get first philosophy right first. And so he's representing this as, well, I've become convinced that many things I used to believe were false. How do I free myself from error? So the goal is, how do I free myself from error? How to be error-free. How to be error-free. That's what he says he's after here. And he considers, briefly, the possibility that he could just go one by one through his beliefs and examine them. Now, this raises a question he doesn't deal with here, or he doesn't deal with explicitly. How do you check that your beliefs are true or false? What's the process by which you do this? Now, it is something he's going to come to have a position about, but it's not going to be the most rigorously presented position in the world, so we'll see that. But he dumps that idea because, as he correctly points out, he has too many beliefs to go through them one by one. Right? That's not going to work. Instead, he wants to attack the foundations. So like Aristotle, Descartes is a foundationalist. He believes all your beliefs are based on some fundamental set of beliefs. So remember that what foundationalism says is there are two kinds of beliefs. There are beliefs that are inferred from others, and there are beliefs that are not. So, for example, if I believe that all dogs are carnivores, right, and all, terriers are dogs, then I'll believe that all terriers are carnivores. This is an Aristotelian syllogism, one of his perfect syllogisms. Okay, so in that case, if the reason I believe that all terriers are carnivores is that I knew these two things, that all dogs are carnivores and all terriers are dogs, then I inferred this. This would be for me an inferred belief. But as Aristotle pointed out with the regress argument, not all beliefs can be inferred. That doesn't make sense, he says, according He says you can't go on forever, it has to stop somewhere, so there have to be some things you know without inferring them from other beliefs. Those will be your foundational beliefs. What Descartes thinks here is he can subject all his beliefs to scrutiny in a way by attacking the foundations of all his beliefs. Because if you can knock out the foundation, right, then everything else falls. If you can show that you don't know that one of your foundational beliefs is true, then everything based on that belief is something that you would then not know to be true. If you remove the justification for one of the foundational beliefs, the justification for all the rest goes away. And I want to be clear here that it's the justification that Descartes is attacking, not the truth. Descartes is not at any point in this meditation or in this book, he is not at any point claiming that the things he's subjecting to doubt are actually false. What he's saying is he doesn't know that they're true. So he's going to end up saying in Meditation 1 that we have no justification to believe that we have a body, that there is a world outside of our own minds, that anything else but us exists, anything, right? Or in fact, he's going to claim he subjects everything to doubt. He's not saying that he actually believes that we don't have a body, that believes that there's nothing else besides us, stuff like that. He's just saying we can't know. He's attacking the justification part of knowledge, not the truth. So remember, knowledge, according to Plato, was justified true belief. Justified true belief. You can attack someone's knowledge, right, their claim to knowledge, by attacking truth or belief, right? If someone claims to know something and you somehow pointed out that they don't even believe it, well, then they don't know it. That'd be a weird way to go about it. Like, if it's true and they claim that they know that it's true, it's weird to say, but I don't think you really believe it. You can imagine context in which it could happen. But more likely, you're going to attack the truth, right? If someone says they know something, you'll prove that they don't know it by proving that it's false. You can't know what's false, at least not when you're being at all strict with how you use the word know. But that's not what Descartes is doing. Descartes is attacking justification. Descartes thinks that the way we commonly justify our beliefs is, for many of us, deeply problematic and needs to be subjected to severe scrutiny. And that's what Meditation 1 is going to do. So, he's going to subject foundational beliefs to doubt in order to test their justification as a way of trying to get error-free. And he says that he's noticed that everything he believed most strongly up till this point was based on sensation, was based on experience. So what he's doing there is, in a sense, pretending that he's all along been an empiricist, that he's thought that all that was most certain in life was based on observation or what the senses tell you. And this is really just his way of introducing his criticism of Aristotle's epistemology by pretending that he once held it, right? Because the Meditations are written in the first person style. He has to act as though, well, I used to think this. It's not clear he ever thought that. Aristotle was right, that all of our beliefs are based in some way or other on observation. But nonetheless, he's pretending to. So he says he's going to see whether he can undermine our attempts to justify beliefs by appeal to our senses, or to undermine the ability of senses to justify things, to undermine the ability of the information we get from our senses to give us reason to believe things. So how's he going to do that? How is he going to undermine our trust in our senses? Well, the first thing he does, the first argument he considers, and he considers it only briefly, is the argument from illusion. So what is the argument from illusion? Well, the argument from illusion starts from the premise, first premise, that we are sometimes subject to illusions. What is Descartes talking about here? Well, he's talking about things like mirages, right? So you're in the desert and the heat is such that there are heat waves coming up off the ground, and the heat comes up off the ground in waves because that's what heat does. It's kind of radiation. And your mind, in a sense, interprets it. Or I should back up, because Descartes wouldn't want to say your mind does this, but you perceive anyway those waves coming off the hot ground as water. And you can, in a sense, be sort of tricked into thinking there's water there. Your senses seem to be telling you there's water where there isn't. Another example involving water, the bent stick thing. You know, have you ever had a cup of water and you put a stick in it and the stick looks bent? What is that, like refraction, I think? There, your senses are telling you something that's not true, that the stick is bent. Another thing could be from very far away, shapes don't appear correctly. So a cylinder will appear to be like a rectilinear prism from sufficiently far away. Like things that are rounded will seem flat, and stuff like that. Things will have the wrong color sometimes. So sometimes your senses can give you information. This is what Descartes is saying. Information that's wrong. What Descartes says next is that we shouldn't trust anything that has deceived us even once. So let's think about that. Is that really good advice? Is that a good rule to follow? Never trust anything that's deceived you even once. It seems pretty extreme. I mean, after all, probably everyone in your life has told you something false at least one time. Now you might think, well, you know, if someone's lied to you before, you shouldn't trust them ever again. If they've intentionally told you something false, you should never trust them again. For one thing, I'll point out that's not what's going on in an illusion, right? Your senses aren't telling you something they know to be false. Senses don't know things. Senses are just a way for information to get to you. So lying isn't quite what we're talking about here. But even in the case of lying, most of us have had people who've lied to us, who we still trust. We have parents, right? Parents lie to kids all the time. They lie to kids about Santa Claus. They lie to kids about the Easter Bunny. They lie to kids about if you work hard, you'll succeed. Stuff like that. But yet we trust them when we're older. We know that there was a reason for them to lie to us. And once we're older, we can understand that reason. Right? Or maybe you're one of these people who gets bent out of shape because your parents told them that Santa Claus is real when Santa Claus isn't real. Like, I don't know what to say to you if you're in that situation. You shouldn't take that so seriously, I guess is what I'd say to you. But the question is, should a source of information that has given wrong information ever, like even once, be discounted fully going forward? That can seem very extreme, but it fits with something that is sort of central to the whole purpose of the book. Descartes wants to be, as I wrote down, completely free of error. So here's what you can say about a source that has given false information before. That it has given false information in the past means that it's the kind of source that does that, and you have every reason to expect that that might continue. Which means that you can't say that it's 100% accurate. And if you can't say it's 100% accurate, then trusting it going forward is not a way to be error-free. Because given enough time and enough cases, it will eventually make a mistake, right? Even if it's 99% reliable, if you call on it enough times, if you use that source of information enough times, it will eventually give you mistaken information. And I point this out because how to be error-free, that goal of being error-free might seem like, well, that's a good goal to have. But that's a different goal than what might be a more reasonable one. The more reasonable goal might be how to reduce error. How to make sure you make fewer mistakes going forward, rather than none. If that were the goal, then this principle, we should not believe something that has deceived us even once, would just be like kind of absurd. Because the fact that something occasionally gives false information, it doesn't mean that it's not going to give you correct information most of the time. And if it's going to give you correct information most of the time, if it's going to give you correct information the overwhelming majority of the time, then relying on that source of information could still be a way to reduce error, right? Suppose your error rate right now is 20%. 20% of the time you make mistakes, and you find a source of information that's 95% accurate. Well, trusting that source of information would then improve your error rate if you could use that source for all cases. But Descartes' not just asking how to reduce error. He wants to know how to eliminate error entirely, how to be absolutely certain. And this second premise in the argument from illusion expresses his commitment to certainty, 100% certainty, to not just reduce error, but to have beliefs about which you are 100% sure that they're true. That is an extremely robust, extremely demanding goal when it comes to epistemology. And he's sort of expressing it in this very first argument. The conclusion of the argument from illusion, then, is that we should not believe our senses, because it's our senses that present us with illusions. Although we'll see that Descartes' going to, so let's go back on that a little later in the book. But for now, works. You might think he's done his job. Right? If it's true that our foundational beliefs all come from our senses, the way that Aristotle believed, then, or they at least rely on our senses, then he's shown that we shouldn't believe our senses, so he's knocked out all of our foundational beliefs. The goal then would be to start over, to rebuild. That's the whole goal of the book. It's not to just eliminate beliefs of yours that are open to doubt, where you might be wrong about them. It's to do that and then rebuild on more solid foundations, to replace your foundational beliefs that are possibly false, and so he thinks that you're not justified in believing, with foundational beliefs that you can be certain about. But unfortunately, we can't stop here, because Descartes is very clearly not entirely satisfied with the argument from illusion. And saying why will be something we do in our next video. I'm going to cut this video off here, having presented the argument and just letting you know Descartes' not going to believe it, or not think that it's going to prove his point the way he wants it to be.